Hello gamers, and welcome back to Wargaming Wisdom, where we try to be a better wargamer every day. Today's video is a study in excess. We're going to talk about going very wide versus building very tall. That is, building an army that has a lot of very cheap units versus armies that have very few big units. And then in between those two extremes, sort of a more balanced approach. We'll do a BattleTech example first, and then we'll go over into SOVL or Sol, which is more of a classic rank and flank type of game with infantry, cavalry, siege weapons, that kind of stuff. A lot more like Warhammer and your more traditional war games. So to start off, we've got a fairly wide force. I've built a clan star here composed entirely of light mechs and 5 elemental units to back them up. So obviously this is 10 units. This is a lot of units to put down on the table. We have elementals that are very hard overall to kill. You have to deal 55 damage to each of these units to completely take them out, and they're going to be really good at taking an objective because they have a delivery system. Really fast light mechs that have reasonable durability that are going to be able to outflank the opponent. Now, you don't really have much in the way of an anchor force here. This is just a good example of using lots and lots of units to your best advantage. The clans don't really have a lot of cheap armor bricks, so using fast units to have high TMM and increase their durability that way is probably more conducive to the clan playstyle. But as you can see, our piloting skills are all very much not elite. Now, our second example is going to be a little bit more balanced, but this is definitely more towards an armor skew, which is kind of a way to go wide in BattleTech. You just spam lots of armor on the table and hope that your enemy doesn't have enough guns to take you out. We've got 2 heavy mechs with some actual firepower, the Battlemaster 6C and the Grasshopper 5H. We've got 2 Charger 1A1s, which are just going to get in there and melee you. We've even taken their piloting and gunnery skills and reversed them so that we don't really care about those small lasers. It's all about just kicking. And then we've got a Mongoose as a flanker to add a little bit of mobility to the list. And then we've got the ultimate build tall force. Now, as you can see on the side here, we've done pretty much 6,000 battle value. I just wanted to show you that you can go super elite with your units. It's technically possible, but it's maybe not the best idea. We've got the 7 jump, Man o' War, very tough, 211 armor, 4 TMM from that jump, able to jump around and keep itself safe from enemy harm, rocking a bunch of lasers. I have run this thing at 3-4 in a tournament, and it is absolutely deadly. But I didn't run it with one other extremely expensive mech. I ran it alongside a bunch of other cheaper units. So our Mad Cat here is one of my favorite clan mechs by far. Bunch of pulse lasers, bunch of SRMs, very good at pretty much every range except for long, and even there we've got the large pulse laser. But obviously building super tall in BattleTech means that you're going to be insanely outnumbered. Having just 2 mechs is building way too tall when you could be facing 5 mechs and 5 suits of battle armor. If you were going to actually build this for a 6,000 point tournament, you'd probably take like one or the other and then some supporting units. But this is an extreme example of why building tall can be very dangerous for you. You don't want to build so tall that you have all of your points put into like 2 or 3 units when the enemy could be fielding 10 or 15. You're just not going to have enough to take out all of their stuff. So now here we are in Sol. This is one of my favorite war games. It's like Warhammer Fantasy, but the rules are very much simplified in a good way. We have an Imperial list here. We've got 2 Imperial tanks, which are both defense 7, lots of wounds, and then 2 wizards on dragons with Hex of Ruin, which is a spell that gives -3 defense. Now, dragons, they're very fast. They're literally the fastest unit in the game, pretty much. They have a powerful fire breath weapon, and they're insanely good at fighting in melee. 5 attacks is a lot for something with this high of an offensive stat. Power 6 is really high in this game. It's compared directly to defense on the opponent, and your power versus their defense determines how likely they are to take damage. I'm using 1,000 points, despite the fact that it's not the standard PvP size currently, just to demonstrate the vast differences in army size and stuff that you can have in this game. So this is super tall. We have 2 dragons, they're 150 points each. That's very expensive. The wizards have a pretty expensive spell. Hex of Ruin is really good, but it is one of the most expensive spells in the game. And we've even gone elite with our infantry. Defense 5 and skill 4 are the highest values that you can have in an infantry unit in the entire game. And discipline 8 is also very high. So everything that we've bought here is very, very very expensive, and they're going to be effective. But what happens when you run up against over 100 infantry? This is a ludicrous number of infantry units to be facing. They are among the cheapest infantry in the game. At 5 points per model, there are cheaper infantry in other armies, but those other armies do not have the army-wide buffs that you can get in Rats, namely Doombell, Frenzy. All of your units have reroll failed attack rolls. We have 2 of these things, so we can use it twice per game, which is really strong. These guys are just going to swing at you with a bunch of attacks, 20 attacks when you charge into them, and they're going to get to reroll all of their failed to hit rolls, which will be 4 up to hit, so it's a 50-50 shot. You are going to get a lot of attacks coming back at you. Even if they're weak, only power 3, it's going to be overwhelming. You're going to have to make a ton of saves, and you're going to fail some of them. On top of that, we do have Hex of Ruin. We saw it in the last force. -3 defense means that even elite infantry are going to go down to like defense 2, and now these power 3 weapons, you have to roll 5s to save against them. So yes, the Imperial tanks are going to be hard for these to deal with, but we have tools to make it so that we can. We also have some monstrous infantry. These aren't really all that important. It's just that you can only have 5 units of infantry, so we could even just like swap those out for some slingers if we wanted to, and make it an even wider infantry force, and just spam even more Rats. I don't know if that will necessarily be more effective. Once we've run out of Hex of Ruin, the Ratkin alphas are going to be able to come in and still hit at like a reasonable power level. So these are kind of our elite reserves to deal with whatever's left after they've engaged our front line of Rats. So these are kind of 2 ends of the extreme. And when you're bringing a big horde army like this, having army-wide buffs that buff all of the models that you have, that's really powerful. Obviously, this ability to have the entire army reroll its attack rolls would still be pretty strong if we had it available in the Empire list, but we have not even nearly the same number of attacks overall. It's like exponential value. The more bodies you have, the more valuable this becomes. So while yes, we could change the retinue of our warlocks to like Ratkin conscripts or something, we want to have these army-wide buffs that are pretty much only available to the Ratkin. Now, here's an example of a list that's a little bit more balanced. We have 2 units of cheap infantry, which are honestly mostly here just to screen the big stuff from being shot by enemy cannons or other powerful ranged weapons. And then we've got 3 big dinosaurs. We've got defense 5, 6 wounds, and then we've got 2 Triceratops with defense 7 and 8 wounds each. These are really tough to get rid of, and monsters and monstrous infantry have a little bit of bonus movement. They're faster, so they give our list some mobility. Then we've got 2 units of big monstrous infantry. Due to scaly skin, they're a little bit slower, but high defense, lots of wounds, reasonably priced at 30 points each, and 2 units of cavalry, the second fastest type of unit in the game behind flyers. And now again, we have that army-wide buff, +1 power to everyone. That's going to make dealing with even heavy infantry pretty reasonable. And we've got a spell that will keep us alive by rerolling failed damage saves, and a different spell that gives one of our units reroll failed attack rolls. So the ability to resist being charged or shot or whatever for a turn, and the ability to pump up the offense of one of our units, both very valuable. So casters, but spells do cost points. So I mean, you could drop the spells and get more infantry if you wanted to, or drop one of these units and get some more basic infantry, taking a balanced approach, but still trying to overwhelm one facet of the game, which in this case is really tough multi-wound units with high defense, of which we have quite a lot, is one way to potentially win. But at the same time, we shouldn't be putting all of our points into these. Here we have an Abyssal Legion. This is basically chaos, and we have 2 dragons again, and another flying melee unit that's really strong, but these are all 150 points, so each of them is taking up 15% of our points. That's a lot to be putting into them. And then on top of that, we're putting in really expensive monstrous infantry, but unlike with the dinosaurs list, where we have infantry that can sort of protect our units from being shot, since you can't shoot through other units, we don't have anything to stop us from being shot here. And we have very few numbers overall, which in a game like this where multiple units can wrap around and charge into sides of other units and stuff like that, you want to have a lot of individual units on the field. So this is an example of going much wider and being sort of more balanced. We still have a dragon. We've got a manticore instead of one of the dragons. It's half the points cost, but it doesn't have as high skill, it doesn't have as many attacks, but it's still pretty much gonna do the job that the dragon does. Notably, it doesn't have the fire breath, which is nice to have, but the dragon ends up being in melee a lot and not really using it very much. Then we have a bunch of just basic infantry. These are cheap bodies, but they are reasonably durable with defense 4. They've got okay discipline, unlike the rats, which will pretty much run away if they lose a fight. These guys have some discipline. That means that if they lose a fight, they've got a pretty good chance of sticking around and not just breaking and running. And we've got 2 Abyssal Chariots, defense 5 with Abyssal Armor, +1 to their damage saves, meaning that against most weapons we've got 2 up saves, which is really quite strong. You've got 5 wounds on these. They're fast, they're as fast as cavalry, very good at charging, but most importantly, they're pretty cheap, only 70 points each. They can fill that role of getting in around to the side and attacking units where they are vulnerable. And again, we've got that Hex of Ruin on both of our casters. Very powerful spell. Can really turn the tide when this basic infantry that's not particularly good can get in and start dealing some good damage with that power 3. Another example of sort of a mixed force. Lots of cavalry, 3 units of cavalry, a couple of units of cheap flyers to flank and stuff, a little bit of range support, and just mass undead cheap infantry. These are the cheaper infantry that I was mentioning earlier. They are really cheap and very, very points efficient overall, only 4 points per zombie. So you get a lot of bodies on the table and they never break and run away. It's kind of the special thing that undead get. But to sum up, what you want when you're building an army is to be able to deal with both types of skew lists. Obviously, your force can't do absolutely everything. But having a nice balanced force that, yeah, you can deal with massed infantry, you can deal with massed high toughness models. Maybe you're doing that by taking spells like Hex of Ruin. Maybe you have army-wide buffs that are going to make your massed infantry even better and more efficient. But just be aware that your opponent might be bringing massed infantry, or they might be bringing tons and tons of big monsters, which are going to be hard for you to take down without some kind of tool to deal with them. So whether that tool is cannons, or Hex of Ruin, or your own big monsters to go and fight theirs, you need to be able to deal with both kinds of things. And there is an incentive to attempt to overwhelm one aspect of that. If you have over 100 infantry units, does the enemy have enough shots, enough attacks in melee to kill all of them, or are they going to struggle to kill all of your crappy little clan rats? If the enemy doesn't have an answer to 100 infantry with very strong army-wide buffs, then you're probably just gonna run them over completely. So how are you going to deal with that? Are you going to use mobility to flank around to their sides and assist your own infantry in melee with them? Are you going to bring a catapult so that you can fling out some shots and thin their numbers before you get in so that they are a little bit less effective? Maybe break one of their flanks so that you can start wrapping around to their sides. Are you going to use massed amounts of mobility units to flank around to their sides while your basic infantry goes in the front and tanks the damage for you? And then how are you dealing with massed cavalry or massed big monsters? Are you going to bring lots of high strength guns and cannons that are going to be able to deal a lot of damage to these big monsters? And then a couple of big monstrous units of your own that also are going to be able to tank the attacks that they have and deal some decent damage back to them as well? Are you going to bring Hex of Ruin so that your basic infantry can suddenly now actually hurt these big things with defense 6 or defense 7? And how are you skewing things in your favor? Are you bringing lots and lots of units, just basic infantry, making it so that they have to deal with your massive amounts of unit spam, just lots and lots of dudes? Or are you bringing lots of big monsters yourself in order to overwhelm their ability of their cannons and their Hex of Ruin to take the these units out. Like, yeah, maybe they take out your Triceratops with their Hex of Ruin that you send in, but then they can't use it again on your Crocodilus cruisers. And then they especially can't use it again on your cavalry. So this is your core concept of the very, very basics of list building and tactics. Try to overwhelm one aspect, but have an answer for the opposite end of that aspect. If you're bringing mass infantry, you have to have something to answer for the big units your opponent might bring. But just think, it is also possible to go somewhere in the middle yourself, make a nice balanced list, and probably have a pretty good chance at winning. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Really appreciate all the support. We're very close to 2,000 subscribers. I would love to get there. Check out the live tab on my channel. I've been playing all kinds of different games lately. Some Total Wars, some Soul, BattleTech. If there's anything you'd like me to check out, feel free to leave it in a comment, and I will certainly consider playing it. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel quite a bit. And have a great day, Wargamers.